We're talking today with Gerard Jones, who's the author of the new book Killing Monsters, subtitled Why Children Need Fantasy, Superheroes, and Make-Believe Violence. He's also author of the popular book from the 80s called Honey, I'm Home. Gerard, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. I think what interested me about this book was that you got into your background, since I've read Honey, I'm Home and have studied it quite a bit because I teach a class on situation comedies.
Oh, okay.
I was curious to find out a little bit more about your background, and both of your parents were teachers, and they raised you in kind of the classic fantasy, didn't they?
They did, yeah. I grew up, Beowulf was one of my first obsession as a kid that I remember. My mother was a high school English teacher, was looking for something that would excite me other than the TV set, and she was starting to read me this story of this monster killing barbarian hero from the Middle English. Obviously, it was a modern translation. So I grew up with that whole component, but then I also really loved TV and plastic toys, and later on comic books, and so my whole life was this interesting kind of dynamic between the better things that my mom was pulling me toward, and then the kind of the classic culture that also spoke to me.
So what did she think when you shifted over into like comic books and that type of fantasy?
Well, for quite a while, I was born in '57, so I was about 9 or 10 when one of the periodic waves of people's worries about popular culture and kids came through, the fear that violent entertainment would make kids violent. So there was quite a while when she was really trying to give me the message that this wasn't good for me and I shouldn't go there. But there was a period when I was about 12 and I was depressed and I was not finding much in my life and I was just sort of spinning there. And actually, one of her students in the high school was pushing Marvel Comics. He was really proselytizing for these as a great popular literature. So it was interesting. It was actually my mom who borrowed some from him and brought them home to me to see if this was something I would like. So she was talking to me about it and curious about why I like these big, crass power fantasies. But she gave me room to explore them and to talk about it with her too. And that was a big turnaround. That's when I ended up deciding to become a writer and decided to investigate pop culture and the audience and how it works. I mean, obviously I didn't decide this at 13, but the ball began to roll at that point.
It was interesting in the book you say that your mom taught you that, basically she said at the time, anything that excited you so much must be doing some good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of your philosophy now, isn't it?
It continues to be, yes. I mean, clearly there are kids who get overexcited by something and act up, and there are some kids who get morbidly focused on something. But far and away, the great number of kids are usually seeking, there's some fantasy there that's energizing them, or that's bringing them something positive. And I think if we trust kids' desires until we have some real-world evidence that something's wrong, and if we teach kids to trust their desires, teach them to say, look, I'm interested in this, there's something here that's fascinating me, let me find out more about it and what it is, the kids will usually end up much more in control of their own behavior and aware of their own feelings. And it's generally best to say, let's go with the fantasy and see where it leads.
In the Honey, I'm Home book, I noticed that you really loved the teen rebel characters. and so we kind of guessed as we went through class that you were somebody who was probably a teen rebel yourself. But now that as I read the new book, Killing Monsters, it makes me realize that probably it was suppressed in you. Was that pretty accurate?
I always wanted to be a rebel. And I think there were those few moments when I could come off with a really good wise guy line that I felt very proud of myself. But for the most part, yeah, I was a very good kid. I was really trying hard to be a good kid, and I think maybe a little too hard. And so in fantasy, being able to connect with an Eddie Haskell in that context, or with the Incredible Hulk, who is less a rebel than this big destructive monster, this sort of id unleashed with muscles, I was able to go into a world where I got to be the thing that I was a little too nervous about. And
so is that why in the book you talk about, I'm talking about in the Honey, I'm Home book, that you kind of put down shows like Beaver and Father Knows Best, things like that, because you came from that kind of idealistic home, but you said it was kind of hypocritical at the same time. You saw things going on in the background, kind of smoldering underneath. And is that why you identified with the rebel characters? You wanted to break free from that mold?
And maybe to puncture the balloon a little bit. Yeah, it's interesting to watch, and I've talked to my parents a lot about this. My mom's gone now, but she and I talked a lot while I was working on Honey, I'm Home, and they were both very vital, interesting people who really really tried hard to live the 50s suburban life, and really it cost him in a lot of ways. Trying too hard to keep things placid and polite and not talking about some of the messy realities of the world created this very civilized home, but it didn't have any room for really any of us to act out or lay our stronger feelings on the table. And so I always had a strange love-hate relationship with the images like Leave It to Beaver, actually, which I think was a terrific show. But as it got more and more kind of moralistic and authoritarian later on, you could see the cracks. You could see that they were trying to keep control of this suburban ideal through Ward, and it just wasn't holding up. And Eddie Haskell became this more and more compelling character. He was the one who revealed some of the hypocrisies of it all.
Yeah. Now, what part of the country were you raised in?
I was raised in California, a small town south of San Francisco.
And I read on the internet recently that somebody alluded to the fact that they thought you would change some things about the book. Maybe you had even said this, where the Honey, I'm Home book, now that's probably been, 14, 15 years since that book first came out, what would you change now looking back? Because you kind of ended with the whole Roseanne era as she was starting.
Yeah. Well, we're exploring the possibility of a revised edition now, so I'll be able to actually make some of these changes. And then having written Killing Monsters, I've gone through a lot more thinking about the function of fantasy and pop entertainment. First of all, I would acknowledge The Simpsons as a huge influence on American comedy.
Right.
I think in some ways, just the way Americans talk, I think The Simpsons was sort of the ultimate show, not in puncturing the family, because it's ultimately a very pro-family show. I mean, it's very much about the ties of love and communication that hold us together in a funny way. But it also shows what fools we are, and how even adults, for all of our attempts to pretend to be on top of everything, are usually just stumbling through the worlds ourselves, trying to hold things together. And so I think it's been a tremendously liberating show for both kids and grown-ups, and it's been this great way of kids and grown-ups bonding, and it really has changed the way TV works. And then also Seinfeld, I think, punctured things in another way by just showing the lunacy of the world we're in, and but as sitcoms do, they always teach that things will finally resolve. But there's a lot more room now in entertainment for the kind of wild, excessive, neurotic, or violent aspects of life.
And now that you have a child, do you view some of the older sitcoms differently?
In a way, yes. I mean, I see he's not really interested in old TV, but I can see that looking at, say, Beaver, some of the early episodes of Theodore Cleaver, and it reminds me of this, the reality of this sweetness of life, and this very earnest attempt to make sense of the world. And I think maybe looking at it as a pop culture critic in my early 30s, I missed a little of that. Maybe I saw a little too much of just the glossy suburban veneer, and not the real sweetness. So maybe I'd like those shows more now if I went back.
Yeah, there's real heart there. It's just so many people rebel against that at a certain point in life, and then when they get older and they have a family, they go, well, gee, there is something there.
Yeah, and I think it's about balance. I think it's about keeping that inner Eddie Haskell alive, but also understanding that he can be part of a functioning world.
Our guest is Gerard Jones, the author of Killing Monsters, a brand new book. And Gerard, let's jump into this because the subtitle, really is probably the most controversial part when you say that children need fantasy and superheroes and make-believe violence. And I can certainly understand where in your book you make a persuasive argument that some children use the fantasy violence to deal with their own problems in their own life. But do all children truly need it? I guess the word need is what I'm focusing on here.
Right, not all. There are kids who, even if they're allowed to explore all these things, toy guns and violent entertainment and so on, just don't seem to be interested in it. So I think what you need to do is allow the child to explore what he or she wants to, within reason, of course, and then see where his or her passions are, but not to try to pull them back, not to try to shape kids too much, because it's really, as one psychologist put it, one of our roles is to help kids learn the difference between fantasy and reality, and a way to help them do that is to let them have their fantasy, let them explore that. So it's not about plunking them down and introducing them to something, but it's about letting them go into fantasy land see what they find there, and then come back and be often better able to meet the expectations of reality.
And yet so many parents say that their kid will go over to a friend's house and all of a sudden see a show or play a new violent video game or something, and they come back changed, and the parents almost don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, it's one of those things, because as a parent, you're always torn. You want to see your kids follow their own interests and be happy and blossom, but you kind of want to know who they are all the time, and you want to direct them a little bit. And it's a constant balancing act. But if kids come back and they seem, see something and they seem disturbed, troubled, then it's good to talk them through that, and it's good to maybe feel out, is this something that's maybe a little too scary or too intense for them? But if they come back and they're just wanting to play more rambunctiously, or it's a kind of a positive aggression, then it's about helping them learn where the limits of real behavior are. But it's also about really appreciating the fantasy. It's about appreciating this pretended aggression, because aggression channeled well is a great thing. And one of the things that kids get from the media is getting their aggression inspired, getting excited to play. And it's about helping them learn what's play and what's real.
But what happens when the line for my child is different than the line for your child, and those two kids get together, and all of a sudden my child gets influenced by your child, and he's doing some violent, aggressive things that I'm really uncomfortable with, because I think it's gone beyond just the normal stage.
Mm-hmm. Well, at that, this is one thing we have to deal with, because there are, we cannot obviously control all the influence.
Right, that's the problem.
Our kid will have, yeah. And if we do manage to clamp down and shelter them for quite a while, still, there'll be a point where they step through that door, and actually the more experience parents and kids have dealing with outside influences and how to modulate things into their own behavior all along, the more little steps there are, the easier it is to deal with as they go. So kids aren't likely, there's a lot of stories, anecdotal material in books like Reviving Ophelia of kids who are very, very sheltered and then hit adolescence when they suddenly inevitably have a tremendous amount more freedom and really kind of go off the deep end for a while, because there's so much they haven't gotten used to. The key is really communication. It's really finding out what they've been seeing, what they've been doing, and it's about again talking about not taking away the fantasy side, but just saying don't hit. We don't do that here. This is your limit, and it puts a little strain. I mean, it's a little extra work for the parents, but that work can be very good. The kids come home with more. They want to push some boundaries. They've seen something new. And the parents, I think it's important just to kind of gently keep the appropriate boundaries in place, and also make it really easy and comfortable for the child to talk about what he's seen and why he's so excited, so that the things are in the open and it doesn't become some sort of power struggle. I mean, if your child's going and doing something and then seems to be really troubled and disturbed every time he comes home from that house, then or really just too pent up, too angry, because some kids do get pretty overexcited by something they'll see, and then they just can't help punching their sister or squeezing the dog too hard or something. Then you may have to say you can't go over there if you're going to act like this. And there's a point when you have to be authoritarian. But I think the best thing is just to get into that dance with the kid of this you can do this, but this is your limit.
And Gerard, in the final minute we have left, the end of the book, you have three basic goals, I think, that you're trying to get across to people: to model, to mirror, and to mentor. Could you just real quickly summarize those 3 points?
Yes. By model, I mean just be the person you want your child to be, and they will usually, if it's a good attachment, they'll grow up to be more like you than like anything they see on TV. By mirror, I mean just let the kid know that you see what he loves and what he's interested into, and if the behavior is good, make that okay. Kids want to be recognized. They want to be noticed. And by mentor, I mean at the appropriate stage when they can understand it, talk about real violence versus pretend violence, and talk about how to marshal their behavior in the right direction.
Great. Thanks to Gerard Jones, the author of the new book, Killing Monsters, available on Basic Books.
Thanks very much.